If you can't stow your medical device, we may have to remove you. The flight attendant's voice was cold. As she berated the disabled passenger, she was oblivious to the 8-year-old boy watching from a few rows back. She saw a child. She had no idea that this boy Elijah had spent the last year memorizing the very FAA regulations she was now breaking. While the other adults on the plane stayed silent, Elijah clutched his dinosaur backpack containing printed-out laws. The flight attendant thought she was asserting authority. She was about to be outmaneuvered by a legal genius. Furthermore, the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination based on disability in places of public accommodation, which includes this aircraft operated by your airline. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. The white-haired businessman in first class lowered his Wall Street Journal. The college students stopped their whispered conversations. Even the crying baby too rose back, seemed to quiet in stunned silence. The flight attendant's face flushed crimson. "Young man, I don't think you understand." "I understand perfectly," Elijah interrupted, pulling a folded document from his dinosaur-themed backpack. "I've printed the relevant regulations. Would you like to review them? Or shall we discuss this matter with your supervisor and the Air Carrier Access Compliance Officer? I'm sure they'd be interested to know that you're threatening to remove a passenger with a documented disability from this flight. Who is this child? How does an 8-year-old know more about aviation law than a seasoned flight attendant? And what happened to bring this extraordinary young boy to this moment of confrontation at 30? 00 FT to understand the remarkable scene unfolding on Flight 2187 from Chicago to San Francisco. We need to go back to where it all began, just 48 hours earlier. 2 days before the flight. Tamara Johnson sat at her kitchen table, staring at the email that had just arrived from her sister Maya in San Francisco. The gentle spring breeze carried the scent of blooming magnolia through the open window of their modest Chicago apartment. But Tamara couldn't appreciate it. Her fingers hovered over her laptop keyboard as she reread her sister's message. "Mom's not doing well. Tam, the doctors are saying weeks, maybe days. If you want to say goodbye, you need to come now. I know things have been tight since Andre left, but I can help with the tickets. Just please come. She's asking for you." And Elijah, Tamara brushed away a tear with the back of her hand. She hadn't spoken to her mother in nearly 3 years, not since the explosive argument that followed her divorce from Andre. Pride and stubbornness on both sides had created a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge until now, when time was running out. "Mum, are you okay?" Tamara looked up to see her son, Elijah, standing in the doorway, his NASA t-shirt slightly too big for his slender frame. A concerned expression aging his young face at 8 years old. Elijah already carried himself with the gravity of someone much older. His teachers called him an old soul. His father had called him too serious for his own good. Tamara just called him extraordinary. "I'm fine, baby," she said quickly, wiping away another tear just talking with Aunt Maya. Elijah's face brightened. Is she still helping build those huge computer systems? The quantum ones? Tamara nodded, marveling at her son's memory. Maya had mentioned her work on quantum computing exactly once during her last visit 2 years ago. Somehow Elijah not only remembered, but had subsequently read everything he could find on the subject. "Yes, she is," Tamara replied. "But she called about Grandma Josephine. She's not doing very well." Elijah's smile faded. He approached the table slowly, his eyes never leaving his mother's face. Is she going to die? The directness of his question didn't surprise Tamara. Elijah had never been one for euphemisms or sugarcoating. He preferred facts clear and unvarnished. The doctors think so. Yes, soon Elijah nodded, processing this information with the same methodical approach he applied to everything. "Then we need to go see her. It's complicated. Elijah, the tickets would be expensive. And I'd need to take time off work, and Grandma is dying." Elijah stated simply, according to the 5 stages of grief identified by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler, Ross denial is just the first stage we should go. Tamara couldn't help but smile despite the heaviness in her chest. Of course, her 8-year-old would reference Kubler-Ross. When did you become such an expert on grief last month after Mr. Wilson's dog died? And he was really sad during our chess club. I read 3 books about it so I could understand how to help him. Tamara's heart swelled with a familiar mixture of pride and wonder. Elijah had always been this way, intensely curious, profoundly empathetic, and determined to understand the world through research. When he became interested in something, he didn't just scratch the surface. He dove deep, absorbing information like a sponge. Aunt Maya says she can help with the tickets. Tamara admitted. Elijah nodded decisively. Then we should accept her help. It's not charity if it's family. It's what the Giving Tree is all. About the Giving Tree? Tamara raised an eyebrow. The book by Shel Silverstein that you used to read to me. The tree gives everything to the boy because it loves him. Aunt Maya wants to give us tickets because she loves us and because it would be a mutually beneficial arrangement. We get to see Grandma, and Aunt Maya gets the emotional support of having her family present during a difficult time. Tamura laughed softly. You make a compelling argument. Counselor Elijah's eyes lit up at the reference. Ever since he discovered a box of old Law and Order DVDs at a garage sale last summer, he'd been obsessed with the legal system. He'd watched every episode, checked out law books from the library that were far beyond his grade level, and had even started a legal clinic at recess, where he mediated disputes between classmates. So, we're going, he asked. Hopefully Tamara took a deep breath and nodded, yes, we're going. I'll tell Aunt Maya to book the tickets. Well, when will we leave? As soon as possible, probably the day after tomorrow. Elijah's expression turned serious again. Will you be okay seeing Grandma after everything? The question hit Tamara hard. Sometimes she forgot how perceptive her son was, how much he observed and understood, despite her efforts to shield him from adult complications. I don't know, she answered honestly. It's been a long time, and we said some pretty hurtful things to each other. In the case of Hatfield v. McCoy, the feud lasted generations because neither side would take the first step toward reconciliation. Elijah said thoughtfully, Judge Fleming wrote that pride is the enemy of peace. Tamara stared at her son. Is that a real case? A hint of a smile played at the corner of Elijah's mouth. No, but it sounded good, didn't it? For the first time that day, Tamara laughed genuinely. She reached across the table and squeezed her son's hand. It sounded very wise. Thank you, Elijah, as Elijah headed back to his room, presumably to start researching San Francisco or hospital protocols or whatever his curious mind would fixate on next. Tamara turned back to her laptop. She replied to Maya's email with just 3 words. We're coming home. The next 36 hours passed in a blur of activity. Tamara arranged for emergency family leave from her job at the accounting firm. Elijah methodically packed his suitcase, including 5 books on law and medicine that he insisted might be relevant to our situation. Their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rosenberg, promised to water the plants and collect the mail by the time they arrived at O'Hare International Airport, early Thursday morning. Tamara was running on nerves and coffee. Elijah, by contrast, was vibrating with excitement. He'd only flown once before as a toddler and remembered nothing of the experience. Did you know that commercial planes fly at an average altitude of $35,000 FT? He asked, as they navigated through the crowded terminal. That's higher than Mount Everest, and the air pressure in the cabin is equivalent to being at 800 FT, which is why some people experience discomfort. Is that right? Tamara murmured, distracted by the check-in signs. Yes, also, airplane windows are rounded, because square ones caused structural failures in the de Havilland Comet in 1954, leading to multiple crashes. That's reassuring, honey. It's actually very reassuring. Elijah continued undeterred. It demonstrates how aviation safety has evolved through learning from past incidents. The statistical probability of being in a commercial airplane accident is approximately 1 in 11 million. An elderly couple in line ahead of them turned around the man's bushy white eyebrows, raised in surprise. Young man, you certainly know your aviation facts, he said, his voice warm with amusement. Elijah nodded seriously. I researched air travel extensively last night to prepare for our journey, and to alleviate any anxiety my mother might experience, the man's wife nudged him, her eyes twinkling. Harold, remember when our David went through his dinosaur phase? This little one reminds me of him. David preferred reptiles to aviation. Elijah stated matter-of-factly, there are significant differences between paleontology and aeronautical engineering. Though both rely heavily on physics principles, the couple exchanged abused glances, while Tamara suppressed a smile. This was typical Elijah, assuming everyone followed his train of thought and could keep up with his mental leaps. My son has an active imagination. Tamara explained gently, not imagination. Mom research. Elijah corrected, there's a fundamental difference. The elderly woman laughed delightedly. Well, whatever you call it. It's wonderful. Are you going on vacation? Tamara hesitated, but Elijah answered before she could formulate a response. We're going to San Francisco to see my grandmother before she dies. The doctors say she only has days left. It's terminal cancer. The blunt statement hung in the air for an uncomfortable moment before the elderly woman's face softened with compassion. I'm so sorry to hear that, dear, she said, reaching out to touch Tamara's arm gently. Family is what matters most in times like these. Tamara nodded, grateful for the woman's kindness. Yes, it is. If you need anything during the flight, we're in seats 14, A and B, the woman offered. I'm Martha, and this is my husband, Harold. Thank you, Martha. I'm Tamara, and this is Elijah. It's a pleasure to meet you both. Despite the circumstances, Harold said, tipping an imaginary Hatton young man. If you have any more aviation facts to share during our flight, I'd be delighted to hear them. As they reached the front of the line, Tamara felt a small wave of relief. At least there would be friendly faces on the plane. She handed over their IDs to the airline agent, trying to ignore the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. It wasn't just the flying that made her nervous. It was what awaited them in San Francisco. Her dying mother, her sister she hadn't seen in years, the weight of old arguments and unresolved pain. Mom, Elijah whispered as they moved towards security. Your heart rate is elevated. Your breathing pattern suggests anxiety. Remember the 478 technique Dr. Powell taught you? Tamara looked down at her son in amazement. Sometimes she wondered if he was actually a tiny adult disguised as a child. She followed his advice, though breathing in for 4 counts, holding for 7, and exhaling for 8. The tightness in her chest eased slightly better. Elijah asked, Better, she confirmed. Thank you. You're welcome now. Did you remember to pack my prescription in your carry-on? TSA regulations allow medically necessary liquids in excess of 4 ounces, but they must be declared at the security checkpoint. Tamara patted her bag. Got it right here along with your documentation. Elijah nodded, satisfied. Good proper preparation. Prevents poor performance. Did you read that in one of your books? No, Coach Taylor says it during football practice, but it applies to air travel too. As they joined the security line, Tamara marveled at her son's ability to combine information from vastly different sources. Medical journals, aviation statistics, and after-school sports into a coherent worldview. His mind was a beautiful, complex tapestry of knowledge, woven together with threads of curiosity and compassion. The security screening went smoothly, despite Elijah's detailed explanation to the TSA agent about his medication for chronic asthma and the legal provisions for traveling with medical necessities. The agent had listened with patient amusement, eventually winking at Tamara as if to say, Quite a kid you've got there. By the time they reached their gate, boarding was already underway. Tamara felt the familiar tightness returning to her chest as they joined the line for their boarding group. This was happening. They were flying to San Francisco. She was going to see her mother for the first time in 3 years, possibly. For the last time. Ever Group 4 now. Boarding announced the gate agent. Elijah tugged at Tamara's sleeve. That's us, Mom. Rows 18 through 26, window and middle seats on the left side of the aircraft. They shuffled forward with the crowd. Elijah clutching his backpack with one hand and Tamara's fingers with the other. Despite his confident knowledge about aviation, she could feel a slight tremor in his small hand. For all his precociousness, he was still just 8 years old, facing a lot of new experiences at once as they stepped onto the jet bridge. Tamara squeezed his hand reassuringly. Ready for an adventure, Elijah looked up at her, his dark eyes serious behind his glasses. "I'm ready. Are you the question?" Held more weight than its simple words suggested. Was she ready to face her mother, to confront the past, to deal with whatever emotional storms awaited in San Francisco? "I think so," she answered honestly, "and if I'm not, I have you to help me through it." Elijah nodded solemnly. Well, help each other. That's what family does with those words hanging between them. They stepped onto the plane unaware that their journey would become far more eventful than either of them could have imagined. The cabin of Flight 2187 was nearly full. By the time Tamara and Elijah reached their row, the narrow aisle was congested with passengers stowing luggage and finding seats, creating a slow-moving human traffic jam. Elijah kept close to Tamara, his eyes wide as he took in every detail of the aircraft interior. "SATs 22A and B," Tamara murmured, checking their boarding passes again. "Almost there." As they approached their row, Tamara noticed a man already seated in the aisle seat, 22C. He was middle-aged with salt and pepper hair and an expensive-looking suit that seemed at odds with economy CL-class seating. He was engrossed in something on his tablet, his face set in an expression of intense concentration. "Excuse me?" Tamara said politely. "We're in the window and middle." The man looked up, his expression momentarily annoyed at the interruption. He gave a curt nod and stood to let them in. Not bothering to step into the aisle, merely rising and pressing himself against the seat to create minimal space. Tamara guided Elijah in first, then squeezed past the man with a murmured, "Thank you." Catching a whiff of expensive cologne, the man didn't respond immediately, returning to his tablet once they were seated. "He's reviewing legal documents," Elijah whispered a bit too loudly. "I can see the case citation formats." "Shh," Tamara cautioned, noticing the man glanced their way with raised eyebrows. "Remember what we discussed about respecting people's privacy?" Elijah nodded seriously. "Right, sorry." As they settled in, Elijah immediately reached for the safety card in the seat pocket, studying it with intense concentration. Tamara took the opportunity to send a quick text to Maya, letting her know they had boarded and would land in approximately 4 and 1 to 2 hours. The response came almost immediately. "Great, I'll pick you up at arrivals. Mom had a rough night, but she's stable this morning. Love you both." Tamara stared at those last 3 words. Love you both. Feeling a complex mix of emotions despite the years and distance, the bond of sisterhood remained. She was grateful for that. At least, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. Flight 2187 to San Francisco," came the flight attendant's voice over the intercom, beginning the standard pre-flight announcements. Elijah looked up from the safety card, giving the announcements his full attention beside them. The businessman continued to work, seemingly oblivious to everything around him, as the plane pushed back from the gate. Tamara felt Elijah's hand find hers. His palm was slightly sweaty, betraying his nervousness, despite his earlier confidence about flying. She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "The statistical probability, right?" she whispered with a smile. 1 in 11 million. He confirmed, his voice steady despite his tight grip. But knowledge doesn't always override emotional responses. That's why exposure therapy is often more effective than cognitive approaches for treating specific phobias. The businessman beside them let out a barely audible sigh as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Elijah kept his face pressed to the window, watching with fascination as other planes moved about the tarmac. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their flight path and estimated arrival time, then warning of possible turbulence over the Rocky Mountains. Turbulence rarely poses any actual danger to aircraft. Elijah stated seemingly to himself, "Modern planes are designed to withstand forces far greater than typical atmospheric disturbances." That's reassuring. Tamara said, though she wasn't particularly worried about turbulence, her mind was too occupied with what awaited them in San Francisco. The engines roared to life as the plane accelerated down the runway. Elijah's grip on Tamara's hand tightened, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. Then came the moment of liftoff, that strange sensation of weight and weightlessness combined, and they were airborne, Chicago falling away beneath them. "We did it," Elijah whispered as the plane climbed steeply. "We're flying." For the next 20 minutes, Elijah remained glued to the window watching as they ascended through clouds into clear blue sky. The businessman beside them had put away his tablet during takeoff, but retrieved it as soon as the seatbelt sign dinged off, immediately resuming his work without a word to his seatmates when the drink service began. Tamara ordered apple juice for Elijah and coffee for herself. The businessman requested Scotch neat, still barely acknowledging their existence. "Sir," Elijah said suddenly, turning to the man, "are you a lawyer?" The man looked up, surprised, momentarily replacing his stern expression. "I am. How did you know your documents have distinctive legal formatting and you're reviewing what appears to be case law regarding corporate liability also? Your watch is a Rolex Submariner, commonly associated with successful professionals in fields like law." The man stared at Elijah for a moment, then let out a short laugh. "Well, that's quite observant. Yes, I'm an attorney, corporate law. That's fascinating." Elijah said, his eyes lighting up, "I'm very interested in law myself. Are you familiar with the case of Liebeck v. McDonald's Restaurants? It's often mischaracterized as a frivolous lawsuit, but the facts actually support the plaintiff's claims regarding corporate negligence and the duty of care." The businessman's eyebrows shot up. He glanced at Tamara with a questioning look. "My son has diverse interests," she explained with a small smile. "Law happens to be one of them." "I see," the man said, clearly bemused. He turned back to Elijah. "Yes, I'm familiar with the case. You're right that it's widely misunderstood." He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I'm Richard Harrington," he said, offering his hand first to Tamara, then, more surprisingly, to Elijah, Tamara Johnson. "And this is my son Elijah. Pleased to meet you both. And how old are you?" "Elijah, 8 years and 4 months." Elijah replied promptly, "And I've read 17 books on law and legal history, though I recognize that doesn't constitute formal education in the field." Richard's expression softened slightly. 17 books is impressive at any age. What drew you to law?" "I like rules." Elijah said simply, "And I like how the law tries to be fair, even if it doesn't always succeed. My teacher says I have a highly developed sense of justice. That's an excellent foundation for a legal career." Richard said, his professional demeanor warming further. The conversation might have continued, but at that moment, a commotion several rows ahead caught everyone's attention. A woman's voice, raised in distress, carried down the cabin. "But I specifically requested a seat accommodation. This is medical equipment, not an optional luxury." Tamara and Richard both leaned slightly into the aisle to see what was happening. A flight attendant stood beside a row about 10 seats ahead, speaking to a woman who remained seated, but whose agitation was clear. "Even from a distance, ma'am, I understand your frustration, but according to our records, no such request was documented for this flight." The flight attendant was saying, her voice professionally calm, but with an edge of impatience. "I spoke to your customer service representative personally." The woman insisted I explained my situation and was assured the appropriate arrangements would be made. Elijah tugged at Tamara's sleeve. "What's happening?" "I'm not sure." Tamara whispered back. "Someone's having an issue with their seating." The flight attendant's next words were audible throughout the cabin. "I'm sorry, but without documentation of the request, there's nothing I can do mid-flight. If you're unable to stow the equipment properly under the seat or in the overhead compartment, we may need to consider other options upon landing." "Other options." The woman's voice rose further. "Are you threatening to remove me from this flight?" By now, many passengers were watching the exchange, some with sympathy, others with the weary expressions of travelers fearing a delay. "What kind of medical equipment do you think it is?" Elijah asked, his natural curiosity piqued. "I don't know, honey." Tamara replied, "But it's really none of our business." The dispute continued, with the flight attendant becoming increasingly firm and the passenger growing more distressed from what Tamara could gather. The woman had some sort of medical device that required additional space, which she claimed to have arranged in advance. Richard shook his head slightly. Airlines are notorious for these communication breakdowns, he commented. I've seen similar situations before as the tension escalated. Another flight attendant joined the first, and their conversation with the passenger became quieter, though the woman's body language suggested continued frustration. Elijah had gone very still, listening intently. "Mom," he said finally, his voice low but urgent. "I think she's being discriminated against." "Elijah, we don't know the full situation," Tamara cautioned, "but I heard her mention the Air Carrier Access Act and the flight attendant dismissed it." Elijah persisted. "That's a real law that protects people with disabilities on airplanes." Richard looked at Elijah with renewed interest. "You know about the ACA? I read about it when researching air travel regulations." Elijah explained it. Specifically addresses accommodations for passengers with disabilities, including seating arrangements for medical devices. The conversation ahead grew louder again, the passenger's voice carrying a note of desperation. "Now, please, this isn't a matter of convenience. I need this device. I can't just check it with baggage." "Then perhaps you should have confirmed your arrangements before boarding," came the flight attendant's reply, audible in the now quiet cabin. "As it stands, the device is creating an obstruction in the aisle, which is a safety violation." Elijah fidgeted in his seat, clearly distressed by what he was hearing. "Mum, she's right. The airline is wrong." He whispered urgently. "It's not our place to intervene, Elijah," Tamara said gently, though she too felt sympathy for the woman. The situation seemed to be reaching a critical point. The senior flight attendant was now speaking into the aircraft phone, presumably consulting with the captain or ground staff. "They might divert the flight," Richard commented quietly. "It happens more often than you'd think when there's a conflict over regulations." Elijah's eyes widened with alarm. "But that would delay everyone unnecessarily, and it's unjust to the passenger who has legal protection under federal law." Before Tamara could respond, Elijah had unbuckled his seatbelt and was standing in the aisle. "Elijah," Tamara hissed, reaching for him. "What are you doing?" But Elijah was already moving forward, his small frame navigating the narrow aisle. With determination, Tamara immediately unbuckled her own belt to follow him, panic rising in her throat. "Excuse me," she heard Elijah say as he approached the scene of the conflict. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding federal aviation regulations." The flight attendants turned in surprise, as did the passenger, a middle-aged black woman with short greying hair and tired eyes. Her surprise quickly turned to confusion at the sight of the small boy addressing them with such confidence. "Young man, please return to your seat," the senior flight attendant said firmly. "This is a matter between airline staff and the passenger." With respect, Elijah continued, his voice steady, despite the attention now focused on him. "This is actually a matter of federal law, specifically the Air Carrier Access Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in air travel." A stunned silence fell over the immediate area. Tamara, who had reached Elijah's side, placed a protective hand on his shoulder but didn't interrupt him. She recognized the look of intense focus on his face. When Elijah was in this state, trying to stop him was like trying to halt a freight train. The passenger looked from Elijah to the flight attendants with astonishment. "He's right," she said. "That's exactly what I've been trying to explain." The senior flight attendant's expression hardened. "Young man, while your concern is appreciated, airline operations are complex and governed by multiple regulations. Now please return to your seat with your mother." It was at this moment that Elijah Johnson stood tall. Despite his diminutive stature, his chin raised dark eyes, flashing with an intelligence that belied his years. The tension in the airplane cabin was suffocating. Every passenger sat frozen eyes locked on the small figure standing defiantly in the aisle, according to the Air Carrier Access Act of 1986, specifically Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 382. 87. This woman has the legal right to be accompanied by her medical device without additional charges or seat assignments. Elijah stated, his voice clear and unwavering. Furthermore, the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination based on disability in places of public accommodation, which includes this aircraft operated by your airline. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. The white-haired businessman in first class lowered his Wall Street Journal. The college students stopped their whispered conversations. Even the crying baby 2 rows back seemed to quiet. In stunned silence, the flight attendant's face flushed crimson. "Young man, I don't think you understand." "I understand perfectly," Elijah interrupted, pulling a folded document from his dinosaur-themed backpack. "I've printed the relevant regulations. Would you like to review them? Or shall we discuss this matter with your supervisor and the Air Carrier Access Compliance Officer? I'm sure they'd be interested to know that you're threatening to remove a passenger with a documented disability from this flight. Hey, I see you're enjoying this video. If this is your first time here, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit that subscribe button to see more content like this." Now back to this incredible story. The flight attendant stared at the papers Elijah was holding out, her professional composure visibly cracking. The second attendant leaned in to whisper something in her colleague's ear. Around them, passengers had begun to murmur, some taking out phones to record the unusual confrontation. "Perhaps," the senior attendant said finally, her voice tight, "we should continue this discussion in a more private setting." "I'm comfortable discussing it here." The woman with the medical device said, a new confidence in her tone. "Unless you're now prepared to honor the accommodation I requested and was legally entitled to." Tamara stood beside her son, a complex mixture of emotions washing over her: pride, anxiety, amazement. She caught the eye of Richard Harrington, who had left his seat and was observing from a few rows back. He gave her a subtle nod of approval. The flight attendant looked from Elijah to the passenger, then to her colleague. Something shifted in her expression. Recognition, perhaps, that she was on shaky ground. "Let me consult with the captain," she said, finally reaching for the aircraft phone once more as she stepped away. The passenger turned to Elijah, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'm Catherine Pearson. Most people just call me Cat." "See, I'm Elijah Johnson," he replied with the formal precision that was so characteristic of him. "It's a statistical fact that individuals are less likely to advocate for themselves when confronted with authority figures. I merely provided factual context to support your position." Kat smiled, the weariness in her face momentarily lifting. "Well, your factual context might have just saved me from being removed from this flight. I need to get to San Francisco for my daughter's graduation." "Tomorrow, we're going to San Francisco too," Elijah said, "to see my grandmother before she dies." Tamara winced at her son's bluntness, but Kat nodded with understanding. "I'm very sorry to hear that," she said gently. "Family is precious." The senior flight attendant returned, her demeanor noticeably changed. "Miss Pearson, we've reviewed your situation and will be able to accommodate your medical device. As required, we apologize for the confusion." Kat nodded, accepting the apology with dignity. "Thank you. I appreciate your reconsideration." The attendant then turned to Elijah, something like respect reluctantly entering her expression. "Young man, while we appreciate your extensive knowledge of aviation regulations in the future, please remain seated during such discussions and allow our staff to handle passenger concerns." Elijah considered this for a moment. "I understand the importance of procedures," he said seriously, "but justice sometimes requires intervention. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Another murmur ran through the watching passengers, followed by a smattering of applause from several rows. The flight attendant's lips thinned, but she merely nodded and moved away to assist another passenger. "We should return to our seats," Tamara said quietly to Elijah, gently guiding him back down the aisle as they made their way back. Several passengers smiled or nodded at Elijah, one elderly man even reaching out to pat his shoulder as they passed by the time they reached their row. Richard was already reseated, watching their approach with obvious interest. That, he said, as they settled back into their seats, was quite remarkable. Elijah shrugged, though Tamara could see the pleased flush on his cheeks. It was just facts. Facts don't care about age or authority. Richard smiled, the last of his earlier aloofness completely gone, a perspective many attorneys spend years trying to embrace. You know, Elijah, I think you might have a future in advocacy law. I'm considering several career paths. Elijah replied seriously. Law is currently ranked third after astrophysics and neurosurgery. Richard laughed a genuine sound that transformed his face. Keep your options open, that's wise for the remainder of the flight. The atmosphere in their row was markedly different. Richard set aside his work, engaging Elijah in conversations about famous legal cases and ethical dilemmas. Tamara listened with quiet pride as her son held his own. In discussions that would challenge many adults, occasionally passengers would walk past on their way to the restroom. Some doing double takes as they overheard fragments of conversation about Marbury v. Madison, or the nuances of First Amendment interpretations coming from the mouth of an 8-year-old about an hour before landing. Kat Pearson made her way down the aisle, stopping at their row. "I wanted to thank you again," she said to Elijah. "Your knowledge and courage made a real difference today." Elijah nodded solemnly. "You're welcome. I hope your daughter's graduation is satisfactory." Kat smiled. "I'm sure it will be more than satisfactory. She's receiving her doctorate in education that's statistically impressive." Elijah noted only approximately 2% of the US population holds doctoral degrees. "She's always been exceptional," Kat agreed. "Like someone else I've met today." She glanced at Tamara. "You must be very proud every day," Tamara replied softly. After Kat returned to her seat, Richard turned to Tamara with a thoughtful expression. "Your son is truly extraordinary. Miss Johnson, please call me Tamara, and yes, he is. Though sometimes it's—" She trailed off, not wanting to say challenging within Elijah's hearing. "Different." Richard suggested, understanding in his eyes exactly, "Mom worries that I don't have enough friends my own age." Elijah interjected matter-of-factly, not looking up from the book he'd begun reading. "But peer relationships are statistically more successful when based on shared interests rather than arbitrary age groupings." Richard nodded, a valid point. "The school psychologist suggested I might be on the autism spectrum." Elijah continued turning a page, "But Mom says labels aren't as important as understanding individual needs." Tamara felt a rush of emotion. She hadn't realized Elijah had overheard that particular conversation with his teacher. "Your mom sounds very wise." Richard said, "She is." Elijah agreed seriously. "She's also extremely proficient in accounting principles and can calculate complex financial projections without a calculator, which is statistically unusual." "Jai," Tamara laughed, touched by her son's assessment of her modest skills as an accounting assistant. "I think you're a bit biased. Sweetie bias implies a lack of objectivity. I'm merely stating observable facts." Elijah replied, then returned to his book. Richard caught Tamara's eye and smiled, a genuine warmth in his expression that transformed his formerly stern countenance for the first time since boarding. Tamara felt herself truly relaxing as the plane began its descent into San Francisco. Elijah once again pressed his face to the window, watching with fascination as the city came into view. The iconic Golden Gate Bridge, the bay sparkling in the afternoon sun, the hills dotted with colorful buildings. "It looks different than I remembered," he murmured. "You were only 3 when we left." Tamara reminded him gently, "I'm surprised you remember anything at all." "I remember Grandma's house," Elijah said quietly, "the blue door and the lemon tree in the backyard, and how she always smelled like vanilla and cinnamon." Tamara felt a pang in her chest. Yes, she loves to bake, always has. As the plane touched down with a slight bump, Elijah reached for Tamara's hand again, but this time she suspected it wasn't fear of flying. That prompted the gesture. "Mom," he said, his voice smaller than usual. "What if Grandma doesn't remember me?" The question caught Tamara off guard in all their preparations, all their discussions about the trip. Elijah had approached his grandmother's illness with a clinical detachment focusing on facts and statistics about cancer and end-of-life care. This was the first time he'd expressed a personal fear about the reunion. "Oh, Elijah," she said, softly, squeezing his hand. "She remembers you. I promise. In her emails to Aunt Maya, she always asks about you." "Always," Elijah nodded. "Processing this information, but terminal illness can sometimes affect cognitive function. There's a statistically significant correlation between Elijah." Tamara interrupted gently. "Even if she's very sick, even if she's confused, sometimes she loves you. That kind of love doesn't forget beside them." Richard was discreetly gathering his belongings, giving them as much privacy as possible in the confined space as passengers began standing and retrieving luggage from overhead bins. He turned to them one last time. "It was a pleasure meeting you both," he said, handing Tamara a business card. "If you ever need legal assistance in Chicago, please don't hesitate to call." "And Elijah," he added, producing a second card and solemnly handing it to the boy, "when you're ready for that legal career, call me. We could use minds like yours." Elijah accepted the card with wide eyes, examining it carefully before tucking it into his book. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. That's very kind." As they deplaned, several passengers nodded or smiled at Elijah. The story of his intervention having spread throughout the cabin, Kat Pearson waved from the jet bridge, hurrying ahead to make her daughter's graduation. The flight attendant, who had been involved in the dispute, gave Elijah a respectful nod as they passed her earlier. Frustration apparently forgotten in the terminal, Tamara spotted Mia immediately, her sister's tall figure and vibrant red dress standing out in the crowd. For a moment she froze, overwhelmed by the sight of the sister she hadn't seen in years. Maya had aged fine lines now visible around her eyes, her formerly long hair now cut into a stylish bob. But her smile was the same wide and warm as she caught sight of them and waved frantically. "Aunt Maya!" Elijah called, breaking away from Tamara, and running toward his Aunt Mia, knelt to catch him in a fierce hug, lifting him off his feet despite his growing size. "Look at you," Mia exclaimed, setting him down to examine him properly. "You've grown at least a foot since I last saw you." 7 1/2 in, actually, Elijah corrected, but he was smiling broadly, his earlier anxieties temporarily forgotten in the joy of reunion. Then Maya was approaching Tamara, her expression softening into something more complicated. Love mingled with old hurts, joy tinged with the sadness of lost time. For a moment the sisters simply looked at each other, the busy airport fading around them. Tam Maya said, finally her voice thick with emotion. Maya Tamara replied. And then they were embracing years of distance, collapsing in an instant. "I've missed you so much," Maya whispered, holding Tamara tightly. "Me too." Tamara admitted, tears threatening. "I'm sorry it took this to bring us back together." Maya pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Mom always said we were too stubborn for our own good. Guess she was right." "Is she?" Tamara couldn't finish the question. "She's hanging in there," Maya said gently. "She's been asking for you all day, both of you," she added, resting a hand on Elijah's shoulder as they collected their luggage and headed toward the parking garage. Elijah recounted the events of the flight to his aunt, who listened with appropriate amazement and pride. Tamara walked beside them, her emotions a tangled mess of anticipation, fear, and a strange, bittersweet hope. San Francisco spread out before them as they exited the airport. Familiar, yet foreign, the city she'd grown up in. But left behind somewhere in this city was her mother, waiting to see her. One last time. Whatever pain and disagreements had separated them seemed suddenly small and insignificant against the looming finality of death as they drove across the city toward the hospital. Tamara found herself studying her son's profile, marveling at the extraordinary child who had just hours ago stood up against injustice with nothing but knowledge and conviction as his weapons. He had come to San Francisco expecting to say goodbye to his grandmother. But he had already done so much more. He had reminded Tamara of the power of courage, of standing firm for what was right, regardless of the consequences. These were lessons she would need in the difficult days ahead. And as the hospital came into view, its modern glass facade gleaming in the late afternoon sun, Tamara reached for her son's hand, once more, drawing strength from his unwavering certainty. "Ready?" she asked softly. Elijah looked up at her, his dark eyes serious behind his glasses. Statistically speaking, No one is ever fully prepared for end-of-life encounters with loved ones, he said. Then, his voice softening, he added, "But we'll face it together. That's what matters most, according to every book I've read on the subject." Tamara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Together she agreed, and as they stepped out of the car and walked toward the hospital entrance, Tamara knew that whatever awaited them inside, whatever painful conversations or difficult goodbyes, they would find their way through it. One fact, one truth, one moment of courage at a time. The hospital corridor stretched before them, its sterile white walls and polished floors a stark contrast to the vibrant San Francisco afternoon they'd left behind. The antiseptic smell, so characteristic of hospitals everywhere, made Tamara's stomach tightened with anxiety. Beside her, Elijah walked with measured steps, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his expression a mask of concentration as he processed his surroundings. Maya led the way, navigating the labyrinthine hallways with the ease of someone who had made this journey many times. In recent weeks, her earlier effervescence had dimmed, somewhat replaced by a quiet determination that Tamara recognized from their childhood. Maya's getting things done mode. She's on the oncology floor, Maya explained as they waited for an elevator room, 412. The doctors moved her there last week when it became clear that she trailed off, glancing at Elijah when curative treatment was no longer a viable option. Elijah finished, "Matter-of-factly, it's okay, Aunt Maya. I understand terminal illness. The 5-year survival rate for stage 4 pancreatic cancer is approximately 1%. Maya's eyes widened slightly as she looked at Tamara, who gave a small shrug in response. This was Elijah processing difficult realities through facts and statistics, finding comfort in data where others sought euphemisms. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, and they stepped inside as the doors closed. Maya reached for Tamara's hand, squeezing it gently. "She's been asking about you both all day," she said quietly. "Ever since I told her you were coming, it's the most alert she's been in days." Tamara nodded, not trusting herself to speak the reality of seeing her mother again. Her mother who was dying. Her mother with whom her last words had been angry ones was suddenly overwhelming. "Is she in pain?" Elijah asked, his voice small but steady. Maya shook her head. "No, honey. The doctors have made sure that she's comfortable, just very weak." Elijah nodded, processing this information. "That's good. Pain management is a critical component of end-of-life care. It's ethically and medically imperative." A ghost of a smile touched Maya's lips. "You know, Mom is going to be amazed by you. She always said you were going to be something special, even when you were just a baby." The elevator doors opened onto the oncology floor quieter and somehow more subdued than the main lobby had been. A nurse's station stood centrally staffed by 3 professionals in colourful scrubs who glanced up as they passed. Maya nodded to them in recognition. Mum's nurse is named Gabriella. She told Elijah, "She's from the Philippines and has been taking care of Mom for weeks now. Mom says she has magic hands. She can find a vein for an IV when no one else can. That suggests exceptional knowledge of vascular anatomy." Elijah noted phlebotomy is both a science and an art form as they approached room 412. Tamara felt her steps slowing involuntarily. Maya noticed and paused, turning to face her sister. "It's okay to be nervous," she said gently. "It's been a long time and these aren't ideal circumstances for a reunion." Tamura nodded, swallowing hard. "What do I say to her, Maya? After everything, you don't have to say anything special. Just be here, that's all she wants." Maya hesitated, then added, "She's different. Tam, not just physically, all that stubbornness, all those old arguments, they don't seem important to her anymore. Cancer has a way of clarifying things." Elijah, who had been observing this exchange, carefully spoke up. Mom's psychological research indicates that unresolved relational conflicts are a significant source of end-of-life distress for both patients and family members. The likelihood of achieving meaningful resolution increases dramatically with direct communication, even if it's initially uncomfortable. Both sisters turned to look at the small boy. His serious face upturned, his eyes wide and earnest behind his glasses. "When did you get so wise?" Maya asked with a soft laugh. "I read extensively." Elijah replied simply, "And I observe people. They're like complex equations, difficult to solve sometimes, but governed by patterns and principles." Nonetheless, Tamara reached out to smooth a wayward curl from her son's forehead, her heart full of love for this extraordinary child. "You're right as usual. Let's go in." Maya knocked softly on the door, then pushed it open without waiting for a response. "Mom, look who's here," she called gently as she entered. Tamara took a deep breath and followed Elijah close at her side. The room was unexpectedly bright sunshine streaming through large windows that offered a view of the city skyline. Cheerful yellow curtains framed the windows, and the walls were decorated with photographs and children's drawings, attempts to humanize the clinical space. A comfortable-looking armchair sat beside the hospital bed, a colorful Afghan thrown over its back, and there propped up against pillows in the center of the bed was Josephine Taylor, a diminished version of the strong, vibrant woman. Tamara remembered her once robust frame had shrunk, the hospital gown hanging loosely on her shoulders. Her dark skin had taken on a grayish undertone, and the hair that had always been worn in a neat chin-length bob was now a sparse white cap against her scalp. But her eyes, those sharp, perceptive eyes that had always seemed to see right through Tamara's excuses and evasions, were the same, lighting up. As they fell upon her daughter and grandson, Tamara Josephine, breath her voice thin but clear, "You came." Something broke inside Tamara at those simple words. 3 years of anger and hurt and stubborn pride crumbled away as she moved swiftly to the bedside, taking her mother's frail hand in both of hers. "Of course I came," she whispered. "I'm so sorry it took me so long." Josephine shook her head slightly. "No apologies. Not today. Just look at you, still so beautiful, my girl." Her gaze shifted to Elijah, who stood at the foot of the bed, watching the reunion with solemn attention. "And this can't be my little Elijah. You've grown so much." "Hello," Grandma Elijah said formally. "I'm approximately 4'7" in tall now, which is in the 89th percentile for my age group. It's statistically likely I'll reach a height of at least 5'11" as an adult, based on familial patterns." A surprised laugh escaped Josephine, the sound transforming her tired face. "Well, that's quite specific. Come closer. Let me see you properly." Elijah approached the bedside, his expression curious as he studied his grandmother. "You look different than I remember," he said candidly. "That's to be expected, though. Cancrosexia affects approximately 50 to 80% of cancer patients, particularly in advanced stages. It's characterized by involuntary weight loss and muscle wasting." Maya made a small sound of dismay, but Josephine merely nodded, regarding Elijah with newfound interest. "You're absolutely right, young man, and you clearly know your medical terminology. Have you been studying medicine among other subjects?" Elijah confirmed, "I find multiple disciplines interesting. Currently, I'm focusing on law, astrophysics, medicine, and quantum computing, though I also maintain ongoing research in several auxiliary fields." Josephine's eyebrows rose. She glanced at Tamara with a questioning look. "He's academically advanced," Tamara explained with a small smile, "and he likes to research a lot." "Extraordinary," Josephine murmured. "Reminds me of your father. Tamara, he always had his nose in some book or another, learning about things most people never even thought to question." The mention of her father, who had died when Tamara was just 15, brought a fresh ache to her heart. "I was thinking the same thing," she admitted. "Elijah has his curiosity and his sense of justice from what Maya tells me," Josephine added, looking at Elijah with warmth. "She says you're quite the advocate for fairness at school." Elijah nodded seriously. "Injustice is statistically correlated with negative societal outcomes. It's logical to oppose it when observed. If you're watching this from your living room or while commuting, I'd love to know where you're viewing from. Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories like this one." Josephine chuckled again, the sound turning into a slight cough. Maya quickly moved to pour a glass of water from the pitcher on the bedside table, helping her mother take small sips. "I'm fine," Josephine insisted, waving away further assistance, just not used to laughing anymore. "It's a good problem to have." She patted the edge of the bed. "Elijah, come sit by me. I want to hear all about this advocacy work of yours." as Elijah carefully perched on the edge of the mattress, launching into a detailed explanation of his recessed legal clinic and his intervention in a playground dispute over swing set time allocations. Tamara watched in amazement. Her mother, who had always been reserved with her affection, who had raised her daughters with firm expectations and limited praise, was engaging with Elijah with a warmth and openness Tamara had rarely witnessed. Maya moved to stand beside Tamara, both sisters observing the interaction with wonder. "She's different with him." Tamara whispered, "She's different with everyone now." Maya replied softly. The illness had changed her perspective on so many things she talks about, regrets a lot, especially about how things ended between you two. Tamara felt a pang of guilt. "I should have reached out sooner. I was just so hurt and angry. After what she said about Andre, about my choices, she was wrong." Maya acknowledged she knows that now. "But you know, Mom, she's always been terrified of us making the same mistakes she did sometimes, that fear came out as control, as judgment." Before Tamara could respond, Elijah's voice drew their attention back to the conversation at the bedside and then on the plane. "Today, I had to explain the Air Carrier Access Act to a flight attendant who was incorrectly applying the regulations regarding a passenger's medical device. He was saying, his hands gesturing animatedly." Josephine's eyes widened. "You did what now?" "It was quite remarkable," Tamara interjected. Moving closer to the bed, a woman on our flight was having an issue with accommodations for her medical device, and Elijah stepped in with a complete knowledge of the relevant regulations. He even had printed copies of the laws in his backpack. "I believe in being prepared." Elijah stated, matter-of-factly, "The statistical likelihood of encountering discrimination or mislocation of regulations in public spaces is surprisingly high." Josephine stared at her grandson for a long moment, then looked up at Tamara with something like wonder in her expression. "This child," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "is absolutely extraordinary. I'm in the 9 percentile for cognitive processing." Elijah offered helpfully, "But I still struggle with understanding social cues and maintaining age-appropriate peer relationships. Every statistical advantage comes with corresponding challenges." The frank self-assessment, delivered with such matter-of-fact acceptance, seemed to touch Josephine deeply. She reached out a trembling hand to brush Elijah's cheek. "You are perfect, exactly as you are," she said firmly. "Don't ever let anyone make you think differently." Elijah considered this statement seriously. "Perfection is statistically improbable. Grandma, everyone has areas for potential improvement, but I appreciate the sentiment behind your statement." Josephine laughed again, this time managing to suppress the cough that tried to follow. "Oh, you are definitely your mother's son. She never accepted empty platitudes either, even as a little girl." A nurse appeared in the doorway, a petite woman with a warm smile and an efficient manner. "I see we have visitors. You must be Tamara and Elijah. I'm Gabriella, the phlebotomist with exceptional vascular knowledge," Elijah said. Nodding in recognition, Gabriella blinked in surprise, then laughed. "Well, that's a new description of my skills, but I'll take it. I just need to check Mrs. Taylor's vitals and adjust her medication." "It'll only take a minute," as the nurse moved around the bed with practiced ease, checking monitors and making notes on her tablet. Josephine kept her eyes on Tamara. "You look tired, daughter," she said softly. "Maya tells me you're doing well at the accounting firm, still working too many hours?" "I imagine the job is good," Tamara confirmed, demanding sometimes but stable. "It's allowed me to provide for Elijah on my own." A shadow of old pain crossed Josephine's face. "I was wrong about Andre about your marriage. I should have supported you instead of criticizing." "Maybe if I had, Mom, don't," Tamara interrupted gently. "What happened between Andre and me? Wasn't your fault. We just wanted different things in the end. He couldn't appreciate the statistical anomaly." "That is my mother." Elijah interjected, his expression serious. "His loss represents a significant error in judgment." All three women turned to look at him in surprise. Then Josephine burst into delighted laughter, joined moments later by Maya and Tamara. The sound filled the sterile hospital room with unexpected joy, transforming it momentarily from a place of illness and impending loss to one of connection and love. Gabriella smiled as she finished her checks. Laughter is the best medicine, as they say. Mrs. Taylor, your vitals are looking stable today. I think these visitors are good for you. After the nurse left, the conversation flowed more easily. Josephine asked about Chicago, about Elijah's school, about Tamara's friends and activities. The heavy weight of their past disagreement seemed to have lifted, replaced by a mutual, unspoken agreement to focus on the present moment, on the precious time they had left together. As afternoon turned to evening, Mia left briefly to fetch dinner for everyone from the hospital cafeteria. While she was gone, Elijah became engrossed in a medical textbook he discovered on a shelf in the room, giving Tamara and her mother a rare moment alone. He really is remarkable, Josephine said, watching Elijah as he sat in the armchair, completely absorbed in his reading. You've done an amazing job with him, Tamara. Thank you. Tamara replied, the simple words carrying the weight of years of longing for her mother's approval. Sometimes I feel like I'm just trying to keep up with him. His mind works in ways I can barely comprehend. But you understand his heart, Josephine observed. I can see it in how he looks at you, how he references you in his conversations. You're his anchor in a world that probably often confuses him. Tamara hadn't thought of it that way before, but her mother's words resonated with truth for all Elijah's intellectual prowess. He was still a child navigating a complex world, and she was his constant, his safe harbor. I wish you could have more time with him, Tamara said softly, the reality of her mother's condition reasserting itself in her consciousness. He could learn so much from you. Josephine reached for Tamara's hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite her frailty. He's learning the most important things already. Courage, compassion, the value of standing up for what's right, just like he did on that plane today. She paused, her eyes growing distant. You know he reminds me of your grandfather. My father, he had that same unwavering sense of justice, that same fearlessness in the face of authority. I barely remember him. Tamara admitted, I was so young when he passed. He was a civil rights attorney in the 60s. Josephine continued, took on cases no one else would touch, stood up against systemic injustice when it was dangerous to do so. He used to say that the law properly understood and applied was the great equalizer. She glanced at Elijah, still engrossed in his book. I think that same spirit lives in your son. The observation sent a shiver of recognition through Tamara. She had never made the connection before. But it felt right, this thread of justice and courage running through the generations, manifesting now in her extraordinary child. Maya returned with food, and they ate together in Josephine's room. The conversation turning lighter as they shared memories and stories. Elijah listened intently to tales of his mother's childhood, occasionally interjecting with statistical observations or clarifying questions that made everyone smile as the evening progressed. It became clear that Josephine was tiring. Her responses grew shorter, her eyes fighting to stay open despite her evident desire to continue, engaging with her family. We should let you rest, Tamara said, finally noticing her mother's fatigue. We can come back first thing tomorrow. Promise? Josephine asked, a sudden vulnerability in her voice. We promise, Tamara assured her, leaning down to kiss her mother's forehead. Right, Elijah. Elijah nodded solemnly. Yes, and I'll bring my book on quantum computing to share with you. Aunt Maya said you were interested in the subject. I look forward to it, Josephine said with a tired smile, though I make no promises about understanding it as well as you do. As they prepared to leave, Josephine called Tamara back to the bedside, her voice lowered so only her daughter could hear. Thank you for coming, she whispered, for bringing him, for giving me this gift before. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I'm the one who's grateful. Tamara replied, her voice thick with emotion, for the chance to see you again, to make things right between us. Things are right, Josephine assured her. More than right now, go get some rest. That boy of yours will probably be up at dawn ready with a full day's worth of facts and observations. Tamara laughed softly, knowing her mother was probably correct. Good night, Mom. I love you. I love you too. My girl always have, even when I was too stubborn to show it properly as they left the hospital, the evening air cool on their faces. Tamara felt a strange mixture of emotions, sadness for what was ending, gratitude for this unexpected reconciliation, and a quiet amazement at the role her son had played in it all. Elijah walked between her and Maya, his small hand in Tamara's, his backpack bouncing slightly with each step. Grandma is experiencing natural end-of life recognition and reconciliation behaviors. He observed thoughtfully. It's a documented phenomenon in terminal patients, a desire to resolve unfinished emotional business and strengthen meaningful connections. That's right. Maya confirmed, sharing a look with Tamara over Elijah's head. She's focusing on what matters most now, and what matters most is family. Elijah concluded with satisfaction. That's consistent across multiple sociological studies. Despite variable cultural expressions, familial bonds remain statistically significant factors in reported life satisfaction and emotional well-being. As they reached Maya's car, Tamara knelt down to look Elijah in the eyes. You were amazing today, sweetie, on the plane, and with Grandma, I'm so proud of you. Elijah considered this praise carefully, as he did all emotional statements. I was simply being factually accurate in both situations, he said finally, but I'm glad it helped. Sometimes, facts are the best way to fix things that are broken. Tamara pulled him into a hug, marveling at the wisdom in his words. Sometimes facts were indeed the best remedy. The cold, clear light of truth cutting through emotional tangles and misunderstandings. Her extraordinary son, with his encyclopedic knowledge and his unwavering commitment to justice, was teaching her this lesson every day as they drove. Through the illuminated streets of San Francisco toward Maya's apartment, Tamara gazed out at the city of her childhood, feeling as though she was seeing it through new eyes. The journey that had begun on Flight 2187 with Elijah's remarkable stand for justice had led them here to reconciliation, to healing, to a new understanding of the bonds that held them together across generations and whatever tomorrow would bring. Whatever difficult goodbyes awaited them, they would face it together, armed with facts with love, and with the extraordinary courage of an 8-year-old boy who understood that sometimes speaking truth to power was the greatest act of love possible. The next morning dawned bright and clear sunlight streaming through the windows of Maya's guest room, where Tamara and Elijah had spent the night. Tamara awoke to find Elijah already dressed and sitting cross-legged on the end of the bed, surrounded by books and papers, his small face set in an expression of intense concentration. Good morning, she murmured, sitting up and rubbing sleep from her eyes. How long have you been up? Approximately 97 minutes, Elijah replied, without looking up from his notes. I've been preparing a comprehensive presentation on recent advances in cancer treatment methodologies to share with Grandma. I thought it might provide her with an interesting distraction from her current circumstances. Tamara's heart squeezed with a mixture of love and gentle concern. That's thoughtful, sweetie. But remember what we discussed about Grandma's condition. She's chosen comfort care now, not treatment. I understand the palliative versus curative distinction. Elijah assured her, this is purely formational. Not prescriptive knowledge has intrinsic value, independent of its immediate practical application. The sound of Maya moving about in the kitchen drifted through the apartment. The clatter of dishes, the rich aroma of coffee brewing. Tamara swung her legs over the side of the bed, her mind already turning to the day ahead. They would spend as much time as possible with her mother, creating memories bridging the years of separation with ours of connection. Let's get some breakfast and then head to the hospital. She suggested, running a hand through her tangled hair. Grandma will be waiting for us. In the kitchen, Maya was a whirlwind of activity, setting out plates of blueberry pancakes, a bowl of fresh fruit, and mugs of steaming coffee and hot chocolate. She was dressed in a crisp blue blouse and dark slacks, her hair neatly styled morning. She called cheerfully as they entered, Though Tamara could see the shadows of fatigue beneath her sister's makeup, I thought we could use a good breakfast before heading over. Mom had a decent night, according to the nurse I spoke with earlier. You look like you're dressed for work. Tamara observed, accepting the mug of coffee Ma handed her. Do you have to go in today? Mia shook her head. No, but I have a video conference at noon that couldn't be rescheduled. Some investors from Tokyo. She gestured vaguely toward a sleek laptop set up on the dining table. I'll do it from the hospital in one of the family rooms. It won't take more than an hour. Aunt Maya's company is developing quantum encryption protocols for financial transactions. Elijah stated, carefully cutting his pancakes into precise triangles. The potential applications for blockchain security are significant. Maya raised an eyebrow at Tamara. Has he been researching my work, apparently? Tamara replied with a small smile. Nothing surprises me anymore when it comes to what he's been researching. I accessed your company's investor presentations online. Elijah explained between bites. The technical specifications were somewhat simplified for a general audience, but the underlying principles were sound. I have several questions about your approach to quantum decoherence. If you have time later, Maya blinked, then laughed. Well, of course, though, I'm not sure I'm prepared for a quantum physics discussion with an 8-year-old. Before I finished my coffee, breakfast passed quickly, filled with comfortable conversation that danced between serious topics and lighter fare. Tamara found herself marveling at how easily she and Maya had fallen back into their sisterly rhythm, as though the years of distance had been nothing more than a brief interruption rather than a chasm of silence and hurt. As they cleared the dishes, Tamara's phone rang an unknown San Francisco number. She answered cautiously, stepping away from the table. Hello, Miss Johnson. This is Dr. Patel from San Francisco General. I'm your mother's attending physician. Tamara's stomach dropped her hand, tightening around the phone. Yes, doctor, is everything okay? There was a brief pause. Your mother had a difficult night after you left. Her condition has deteriorated, somewhat more rapidly than we anticipated. She's stable for now, but I wanted to let you know that you might want to come in as soon as possible. The carefully neutral tone couldn't disguise the underlying message. Time was running out faster than they'd thought. We are on our way. Tamara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Thank you for calling. As she ended the call, she turned to find Maya and Elijah watching her, both having sensed the shift in atmosphere. Mom, Maya asked, already knowing the answer. We need to go now, Tamara said. Simply, Dr. Patel says she's deteriorating more quickly than expected. Maya nodded immediately, moving to gather her purse and keys. Elijah sat very still for a moment, then methodically began packing his books and notes into his backpack, his movements precise and controlled. Elijah, Tamara said gently, kneeling beside him. Are you okay? He nodded, not meeting her eyes. The median survival time following transition to end-of-life care in pancreatic cancer patients is approximately 2 weeks, but there's significant statistical variance based on individual factors. Grandma's rapid decline suggests she may be an outlier on the lower end of the distribution. The clinical assessment delivered in his matter-of-fact tone might have seemed cold to an outsider, but Tamara recognized it for what it was. Elijah's way of processing difficult emotions, of making sense of the chaotic and painful reality they were facing. That's right, she confirmed softly, which is why we need to make the most of today. Elijah nodded again, zipping his backpack with finality. I've reorganized my presentation to prioritize the most relevant information given the compressed time frame. The drive to the hospital was tense, the morning traffic seeming to move with excruciating slowness. Maya navigated with the focused intensity of someone trying to outrun inevitability, while Tamara kept glancing back at Elijah, who sat quietly in the back seat, gazing out at the city. When they finally arrived at San Francisco General, they moved swiftly through the now familiar corridors to the oncology floor. The atmosphere seemed different today, quieter, more somber, as if the entire ward had collectively acknowledged that one of their patients was beginning the final transition. Dr. Patel met them outside room 412, a tall, slender woman with kind eyes and a gentle manner that somehow conveyed both compassion and professional detachment. Miss Johnson. Miss Taylor, she greeted them, her gaze, including both sisters, before shifting to Elijah with a warm smile. And you must be Elijah, your grandmother has mentioned you. Is she awake? Maya asked, anxiously. Yes, though she's drifting in and out. Dr. Patel explained, the increased pain medication makes her drowsy, but she's been asking for you all morning. She hesitated, then added, I should prepare you. There's been a noticeable change since yesterday. She's much weaker, and her breathing is more labored. Tamara felt Elijah's hand slip into hers, a silent request for reassurance that she immediately answered with a gentle squeeze. We understand, she said. Thank you for taking such good care of her. Dr. Patel nodded. She's a remarkable woman, very determined. I think she's been holding on for this reunion. With a final sympathetic smile, she stepped aside to let them enter the room. The change in Josephine was immediately apparent. Where yesterday she had been alert and engaged. Today she lay against the pillows with her eyes closed, her breathing shallow and uneven. The machines beside her bed seemed to have multiplied overnight, their soft beeps and hums creating a technological backdrop to the scene. Maya moved immediately to the bedside, taking one of her mother's hands. Mom, we're here. Josephine's eyes fluttered open slowly, as if the simple act required tremendous effort. Recognition dawned gradually in her gaze, as it moved from Maya to Tamara, and finally to Elijah. My family. She whispered the words barely audible altogether. We came as soon as we heard Tamara said, moving to the opposite side of the bed. How are you feeling? A ghost of Josephine's familiar rice smile touched her lips. Like I'm dying, daughter. No point pretending otherwise. The blunt assessment so characteristic of her mother brought unexpected tears to Tamara's eyes, even now facing the end. Josephine remained unapologetically herself, direct, unsentimental, honest to the core grandma. Elijah said, stepping forward to stand at the foot of the bed, I've prepared a presentation on recent advances in quantum computing with particular emphasis on potential applications in medical research. Would you like me to share it with you? Josephine's eyes softened as they focused on her grandson. I would love that, Elijah, but first come closer. Let me see you properly. Elijah approached the side of the bed, his backpack still slung over one shoulder. His expression solemn as he studied his grandmother's diminished form. You're experiencing Cheyne-Stokes respiration. He observed quietly. It's common in the terminal phase of illness, characterized by rhythmic waxing and waning of breathing depth, with periods of apnea. For a moment, Tamara tensed, uncertain how her mother would respond to such a clinical observation of her condition. But Josephine merely nodded, a look of respect crossing her tired features. You have a remarkable mind, young man, she said, and a remarkable ability to face difficult truths directly. That's a rare gift. Elijah considered this assessment. Statistical data suggests that approximately 76% of people engage in some form of denial or avoidance when confronted with mortality, either their own or that of loved ones. It's a common psychological defense mechanism, but not necessarily an optimal approach for processing reality. A weak chuckle escaped Josephine. No, it's not, she agreed, and reality is what we're dealing with today, isn't it? For the next hour they sat with Josephine, the conversation flowing gently around her. Increasing periods of drowsiness, Elijah did indeed share his presentation, though in a modified form, sketching the basic principles of quantum computing, while seated in the chair beside her bed. His voice soft but clear, as he explained complex concepts with remarkable simplicity. Josephine listened with evident interest, asking occasional questions that revealed her own sharp intelligence. During one of her more alert periods, she beckoned Tamara closer. There's a box in my closet at home, she whispered, blue with silver stars. It has some things I've saved for Elijah, legal books that belong to my father. I think he'd appreciate them. I'll make sure he gets them. Tamara promised, her throat tight with emotion. And there's a letter for you. Josephine continued things I should have said years ago, but was too proud to admit. Her hand tightened around Tamara's. I was wrong about so many things, daughter. About Andre, about your choices. I was afraid for you. And that fear came out as judgment. Mom, you don't need to. I do. Josephine interrupted with surprising firmness. Time is the one thing I don't have to waste anymore. I need you to know that I have always been proud of you, Tamara. Always the way you've raised that exceptional boy on your own, the strength you've shown, you're everything I hoped you would become. And more tears spilled down Tamara's cheeks as decades of longing for her mother's approval finally found fulfillment in these precious, painful moments. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means everything to me." As the morning progressed, Josephine's periods of wakefulness grew shorter, her breathing more labored. A nurse came in regularly to check her vitals and adjust her medication each time, exchanging concerned glances with Maya and Tamara that communicated what words did not need to say. The end was approaching around 11:30. Maya reluctantly mentioned her video conference. "I can cancel it." She offered, her eyes never leaving her mother's face. "No," Josephine murmured, rousing briefly from sleep. "Go do your work. I'm not going anywhere just yet." Maya hesitated, torn between professional obligations and the fear of missing these final moments. "I'll be right down the hall," she said. "Finally, 20 minutes, 30 at most, we'll be right here." Tamara assured her, "If anything changes, I'll come get you." Immediately after Maya left, the room fell into a gentle silence, broken only by the soft mechanical sounds of the medical equipment and Josephine's uneven breathing. Elijah, who had been quietly reading in the corner, approached the bed again, his expression thoughtful. "Grandma," he said softly, "may I ask you a question about dying?" Tamara started to intervene, worried the topic might be too direct, but Josephine opened her eyes and nodded slightly. "Ask me anything, Elijah." Are you afraid?" he inquired, his voice neither morbid nor fearful, simply curious. Josephine considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, not of death itself. She answered finally, "But I do feel regret for time wasted on pride and anger, for moments I can never get back." Elijah nodded. Processing this information, the psychological literature suggests that end-of-life regrets typically center around relational factors rather than achievement-oriented ones. Your experience appears to confirm this statistical trend. "Smart boy," Josephine murmured. "Yes, that's exactly right. Remember that, Elijah, when you're making your own choices in life, relationships matter more than achievements, more than being right, more than pride." I learned that lesson too late. "I'll remember," Elijah promised solemnly then. After a moment's hesitation, he added, "Grandma, I brought something for you." From his backpack, he withdrew a carefully folded piece of paper. "It's a letter I wrote explaining why meeting you has been statistically significant in my personal development, despite the brevity of our acquaintance." With trembling hands, Josephine accepted the letter, tears gathering in her eyes as she unfolded it. "Would you read it to me, Elijah? My eyes aren't what they used to be." Elijah nodded, taking the paper back and clearing his throat with the formality of someone about to deliver an important address. "Dear Grandma," he began, his young voice steady and clear. "While our direct interaction has been limited to approximately 2 hours, as of the writing of this letter, I have calculated that your influence on my existence is disproportionately significant when compared to the temporal parameters of our relationship." Tamara watched in wonder as her son continued reading a letter that combined statistical analysis with profound emotional insights written in Elijah's unique voice, yet conveying a depth of feeling that transcended his clinical terminology. "Your genetic contribution constitutes approximately 25% of my DNA," he read. "But your impact extends beyond mere biology into the realm of familial identity and cultural heritage. Through Mom's stories and through our brief but meaningful interactions, I have identified 17 specific characteristics that appear to have been transmitted through our familial line, including analytical thinking, commitment to justice, and resilience in the face of adversity." Josephine listened with rapt attention, her eyes never leaving Elijah's face as he continued. "While I recognize that your physical presence in my future development will be limited by biological inevitability, I want to assure you that your influence will continue through the principles and perspectives that have been communicated to me both directly and indirectly. Furthermore, I commit to researching your life more thoroughly in order to better understand the historical and personal context that shaped your experiences. As Elijah neared the end of his letter, his voice grew softer. In conclusion, I wish to express gratitude for your role in the statistical improbability that is my existence. The specific combination of genetic material, familial values, and historical circumstances that resulted in my current state of being would have been impossible without your participation in the causal chain. That fact alone merits acknowledgement and appreciation. He looked up from the paper, meeting his grandmother's tearful gaze directly, sincerely. Elijah Ander Johnson, your grandson and beneficiary of your legacy. For a long moment, the room was silent, save for the gentle beeping of monitors and Josephine's uneven breathing. Then, with evident effort, she raised a hand to touch Elijah's cheek. "That," she whispered, "is the most beautiful letter I have ever received." Elijah tilted his head. "Considering this assessment, it's factually accurate." He said simply, "But I'm pleased you found it aesthetically and emotionally satisfying as well." A soft laugh escaped Josephine, followed by a more pronounced coughing spell that sent Tamara reaching for the call button. But Josephine waved her away, regaining her composure with visible effort. "I'm all right," she insisted, just not used to laughing anymore. She focused again on Elijah. "Thank you for your letter, grandson. It means more to me than you can know." Elijah nodded carefully, folding the letter and placing it on the bedside table. "I'll leave it here for you," he said. Statistical analysis suggests that tangible mementos provide psychological comfort in times of transition, as if on cue Maya returned from her video conference slipping quietly back into the room. "How is she?" she whispered to Tamara. "Hanging in there," Tamara replied softly. Elijah just read her. The most amazing letter for the next few hours. They maintained their vigil at Josephine's bedside. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes engaging in brief conversations, other times simply lying with her eyes closed. Her breathing growing increasingly labored, the nurses came and went, adjusting medications, checking vitals, offering quiet words of support to the family. Late in the afternoon, during one of Josephine's more lucid periods, she beckoned both her daughters' clothes. "I need you to promise me something." "Ah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now, both of you? Anything?" Mom Maya responded immediately, while Tamara nodded her agreement. "Don't waste time on petty disagreements," Josephine continued. "Life is too short, too precious. Stay connected. Be there for each other." And for Elijah, her eyes shifted to where her grandson sat nearby. Absorbed in a medical textbook, but undoubtedly listening to every word that boy is going to change the world someday, he'll need both of you behind him. "We promise," Tamara said, reaching across the bed to take Maya's hand, forming a circle of connection with their mother at the center. "Good," Josephine murmured, satisfaction evident in her tired eyes. "Then I can go in peace." The words sent a chill through Tamara, the explicit acknowledgement that the end was near. But there was also something profoundly right about them, about her mother facing death, with the same directness and clarity with which she had faced life. As evening approached, Dr. Patel returned to check on Josephine. After a brief examination, she drew Tamara and Maya aside, her expression gentle but grave. "Your mother is transitioning," she said quietly. "I don't expect her to make it through the night. Her organs are beginning to shut down, and her oxygen levels are decreasing despite supplementation. She's not in pain," she added quickly, seeing the distress on their faces. "The medication is keeping her comfortable. Thank you." Tamara managed her voice thick with unshed tears. "For everything you've done for her," Dr. Patel nodded. "She's a remarkable woman. It's been an honor to care for her." She glanced toward Elijah, who was watching their conversation with obvious interest. "Would you like me to speak with your son? Sometimes children have questions about the process that can be difficult for family members to address." Tamara considered the offer, then shook her head. "Thank you, but Elijah has already researched end-of-life processes extensively. He understands what's happening, probably in more detail than I do." The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded in acceptance. Very well. The nursing staff will continue to monitor her closely, and I'll be on call all night if you need anything. There's a family room down the hall where you can rest if needed, but you're welcome to stay here as long as you wish after Dr. Patel left. Maya went to arrange for food to be delivered to the hospital, knowing that none of them would want to leave. Tamara sat beside her mother's bed, holding her hand, watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest. With each precious breath, Elijah approached quietly, standing beside Tamara. "Mom," he said softly, "I've been calculating the statistical probability of Grandma regaining consciousness based on her current vital signs and medication levels." Tamara turned to look at him, recognizing the concern behind his clinical approach. "And what did you determine?" "The probability is decreasing exponentially," he replied, his voice steady despite the gravity of his assessment. "If there's anything else you want to say to her, it would be statistically advisable to do so within the next 2-3 hours while there's still a reasonable chance she might hear you." The methodical analysis delivered with such matter-of-fact precision might have seemed cold to an outsider, but Tamara understood it for what it was, Elijah's way of caring, of trying to help her navigate this painful transition with the tools he best understood: facts and probabilities. "Thank you, sweetie," she said softly. "That's very helpful." Elijah nodded, satisfied that his information had been received as intended. He hesitated, then asked, "Is it appropriate for me to continue talking to Grandma, even if the probability of her processing the auditory input is decreasing?" "Absolutely," Tamara assured him. "Many doctors believe that hearing is the last sense to go. She might still be able to hear us, even if she can't respond." This seemed to satisfy Elijah's concern for protocol. He moved to the opposite side of the bed and with careful deliberation took his grandmother's other hand. "Grandma," he began, his voice taking on the formal tone he used for his most serious communications, "I want to inform you that meeting you has been statistically significant in my personal development. While our direct interaction has been temporally limited, I have identified multiple areas of intellectual and emotional congruence that suggest genetic and cultural transmission of traits across generations." Tamara watched as her son continued his unusual but heartfelt goodbye, marveling at his ability to express deep emotion through the framework of facts and analysis that made sense to him. There was profound love in his careful cataloguing of the traits he shared with his grandmother, in his assurance that he would continue researching her life and contributions, in his promise to apply the principles she had demonstrated in his own pursuit of knowledge and justice. As night fell outside the hospital windows, Josephine's breathing grew more erratic with longer pauses between each shallow inhalation. Maya returned with food that none of them had much appetite for, and the hours stretched on in a strange limbo of waiting and watching, of quiet conversations and long silences around midnight. Elijah, despite his determination to remain vigilant, finally succumbed to exhaustion, curling up in the armchair with his backpack as a pillow. Tamara covered him with a colorful afghan that had been draped over the chair, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. "He's extraordinary," Maya whispered, watching the sleeping child. "I've never met anyone like him." "Neither have I," Tamara agreed. "Sometimes I wonder how I got so lucky." "Not luck," came a barely audible voice from the bed. Strength, both sisters turned in surprise to find Josephine's eyes open, her gaze clear, despite her obvious weakness. "Mum," my breath moving quickly to the bedside, "we thought you were sleeping, just conserving energy." Josephine murmured, "For this one last time with my girls." Tamara joined Mare at the bedside, both daughters leaning close to hear. Their mother's fading voice, "I'm so proud of you both," Josephine whispered. "So proud of the women you've become. Maya with her brilliant mind, changing the world with technology. I can barely comprehend. And Tamara, with her incredible strength, raising that remarkable boy on her own." She paused each word, clearly requiring tremendous effort. "I made mistakes, too strict, sometimes too afraid for you, but I always loved you, always believed in you." "We know, Mom," Maya assured her, tears streaming freely down her face. "Now we've always known, and we love you too." Tamara added her own vision, blurred with tears. So much. A faint smile touched Josephine's lips. Take care of each other, and take care of that boy. The world needs minds, like his hearts, like his we will. Tamara promised we'll stay connected, just like you asked. Josephine's eyes drifted toward the sleeping form of Elijah, a look of profound love crossing her face. My legacy, she whispered, not just genes and history, but justice, courage, truth. Her breathing grew more labored, each word seeming to cost her greatly. Tell him his grandma is so proud to have met such an extraordinary young man. We'll tell him, Maya assured her. Squeezing her hand gently for several minutes, Josephine seemed to drift away, her eyes closing, her breathing shallow and irregular. Then suddenly her eyes opened once more with a clarity and focus that was startling in its intensity. Remember, she said, her voice surprisingly strong for one brief moment. Love is the only thing that matters in the end. Not being right, not pride, just love with those words. She closed her eyes again, and though she continued breathing for several hours more, she didn't speak again or open her eyes. Tamara and Maya maintained their vigil, sometimes talking softly about childhood memories, sometimes sitting in companionable silence, always holding their mother's hands as her breathing grew fainter, and the pauses between breaths lengthened in the quiet hours before dawn, with the first hint of morning light beginning to filter through the hospital windows. Josephine Taylor took her final breath, a soft exhalation that seemed to contain a lifetime of struggles and triumphs, of mistakes and wisdom, of fierce love and profound regret. The sisters sat in silence for several minutes, still holding their mother's hands, which were growing cooler. With each passing moment, it was Maya who finally spoke, her voice thick, with tears, but steady. "She's gone," she said, simply. Tamara nodded, unable to speak, past the knot in her throat. Her eyes drifted to Elijah, still asleep in the armchair, unaware that his grandmother had slipped away while he dreamed. "How do we tell him?" Maya whispered, following her sister's gaze. "With honesty," Tamara replied, finding her voice at last. "That's all he ever wants from us, the truth. Even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult," as if sensing he was being discussed. Elijah stirred his eyes, opening slowly. He blinked, orienting himself to his surroundings, then sat up, his gaze immediately going to the hospital bed where his grandmother lay. "She's gone," he said quietly, not a question, but a statement of observed fact. Tamara nodded, watching her son carefully. "Yes, sweetie, Grandma passed away a few minutes ago." Peacefully in her sleep, Elijah processed this information with his characteristic thoughtfulness, his eyes never leaving his grandmother's still form. "The cessation of vital functions is the clinical definition of death," he said finally, "but it fails to capture the experiential reality of loss." With careful movements, he slid from the chair and approached the bed, standing beside Tamara. "She wanted to say goodbye to us," he observed. "That's why she held on until we arrived in San Francisco. The statistical improbability of her surviving until our visit suggests significant psychological factors influencing her physiological state." "I think you're right." Tamara agreed, putting an arm around his shoulders. "She was waiting for us for you." Especially, Elijah considered this, then reached out to touch his grandmother's hand, his small fingers tracing the prominent veins and age spots with gentle curiosity. "Her body temperature is decreasing at approximately 1.5 degrees. F hour, he noted soon. Cellular breakdown will accelerate, initiating the process of physical decomposition." The clinical observation might have seemed disturbing coming from a child, but Tamara recognized it for what it was. Elijah's way of processing the reality of death, of making sense of the profound transition that had occurred in this quiet hospital room. Yes, she acknowledged simply, "That's what happens. But her genetic material continues in us." Elijah continued, his voice taking on a more reflective quality, "and her ideas, her values, her knowledge, those continue too, transmitted through social and cultural mechanisms rather than biological ones." He looked up at Tamara, his dark eyes serious behind his glasses. "That's a form of immortality, isn't it? Statistically speaking, her influence will continue to propagate through future generations, creating a kind of legacy that transcends physical existence. Tamara felt tears welling in her eyes again, but they were different now, touched with wonder at her son's profound understanding at his ability to find meaning and continuity even in the face of death. "Yes, Elijah," she whispered, pulling him close. "That's exactly right, and you are an important part of that legacy." Maya joined them, forming a small circle beside the hospital bed, the three of them connected by bonds of blood and love and shared experience outside. The sun was rising over San Francisco, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, heralding a new day that Josephine Taylor would not see, but that would be shaped in countless small ways by the life she had lived and the love she had given. And in that quiet moment of grief and connection, Tamara found herself thinking of the extraordinary journey that had brought them here, a journey that had begun on Flight 2187 with her remarkable son standing up for justice, and that had led through unexpected twists and turns to this moment of loss and continuity, of endings and new beginnings. Elijah had come to San Francisco to meet his grandmother before she died. But he had done so much more than that. With his unwavering commitment to truth and fairness, with his extraordinary mind and his compassionate heart, he had helped heal old wounds bridge long-standing divisions and create space for reconciliation and love in the precious final hours of Josephine's life. As a new day dawned, Tamara held her son close, grateful beyond words for the extraordinary child who had taught her, and everyone whose life he touched, that sometimes the most powerful act of love was simply standing up for what was right, armed with nothing more than knowledge, courage, and an unwavering commitment to truth. 3 days later, Tamara and Elijah stood at the departure gate at San Francisco International Airport, preparing to board their flight back to Chicago. Maya stood with them, the sisters holding hands in the final moments before separation. "I'll be in Chicago next month for that conference," Maya reminded Tamara. "Well, have dinner, catch up properly, and you'll stay with us." Tamara insisted, "No more hotels when you come to town." "Your family?" Maya smiled. The grief of the past days, softened by the renewed connection between them deal. She knelt down to Elijah's level, looking him in the eyes. "And you, mister, I expect regular email updates on your latest research interests. Your old aunt might even be able to provide some useful resources, especially if you're still interested in quantum computing." Elijah nodded seriously. "I'll create a bi-weekly communication schedule with appropriate subject matter categorization, and I've prepared a list of 17 specific questions regarding quantum decoherence that I'd appreciate your insights on." Maya laughed, pulling him into a hug. "I wouldn't expect anything less organized from you." As the boarding announcement came over the loudspeaker, Tamara embraced her sister one last time. "Thank you," she whispered, "for bringing us back together, for giving us this time with Mom." "She was waiting for you," Maya replied softly. "For both of you, these last days meant everything to her." With final goodbyes and promises to call upon landing, Tamara and Elijah joined the boarding line. Elijah clutching his now bulging backpack in addition to his books and notes. It contained several treasured items from his grandmother's collection legal volumes that had belonged to his great-grandfather. A vintage fountain pen that Josephine had used throughout her teaching career, and photographs spanning generations of the family's history. As they settled into their seats on the plane, Elijah immediately began organizing his reading materials for the flight, arranging them in order of planned consumption. Tamara watched him with a small smile, her heart full of love for this extraordinary child who processed the world so differently from most, but who understood its most important truths with remarkable clarity. "Elijah," she said softly, "I've been thinking about what happened on our flight here with Ms. Pearson and her medical device." Elijah looked up, his expression curious. "Are you referring to my intervention regarding the Air Carrier Access Act regulations?" "Yes, I've always taught you to respect authority figures and follow rules, but you recognized something I didn't in that moment, that sometimes standing up against authority is the right thing to do when the rules aren't being applied fairly." Elijah considered this thoughtfully. Authority derives its legitimacy from the consistent and equitable application of established principles. He said, finally, when those principles are violated, the authority itself becomes compromised in such instances. Intervention is not disrespectful, but rather a reinforcement of the foundational values that the authority is meant to uphold. Tamara blinked momentarily, taken aback by the sophisticated analysis. That's a very profound observation. Elijah, thank you. I've been contemplating the philosophical underpinnings of civil disobedience since our encounter on the previous flight, Martin. Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail provides a compelling framework for understanding the moral imperative to oppose unjust applications of authority as the plane began to taxi toward the runway. Tamara marveled yet again at the complex, brilliant mind of her son, a mind that could synthesize legal regulations, philosophical principles, and ethical imperatives into a coherent worldview. At an age when most children were still learning basic arithmetic. Grandma was right about you, she said softly. You're going to change the world someday. Elijah looked up from his book. His expression, serious statistical probabilities regarding any individual's impact on large-scale social systems are difficult to calculate with precision, he replied. But I do intend to apply my cognitive abilities to socially beneficial outcomes as the plane accelerated down the runway. Elijah reached for Tamara's hand, just as he had on their outbound flight, but this time there was a different quality to his grip. Not the nervous tension of a child facing an unfamiliar experience, but the steady pressure of shared understanding of mutual support in the face of loss and change. Mom, he said quietly as the plane lifted off San Francisco, falling away beneath them. I've been analyzing our experience with Grandma from multiple perspectives, psychological, sociological, even evolutionary, and I've reached a preliminary conclusion that I'd like to share with you. What's that, sweetie? Tamara asked, touched by his thoughtful tone. The statistical data strongly suggests that the quality of human connections has a more significant impact on subjective well-being than almost any other variable, he stated, his eyes serious behind his glasses. In other words, relationships matter more than achievements or material acquisitions. Grandma was empirically correct in her final advice to us. Tamara felt tears prick her eyes at this simple yet profound observation. Her son's unique way of processing and affirming the wisdom his grandmother had shared in her final hours. Yes, she was, Tamara agreed softly. Relationships are what matter most in the end. Elijah nodded, satisfied with this confirmation of his analysis. I've adjusted my priority matrix accordingly, he informed her solemnly. While I will continue to pursue knowledge acquisition at an accelerated rate, I will also allocate increased resources to relationship development and maintenance, beginning with you and Aunt Maya. The statement, delivered with such earnest formality, filled Tamara's heart with a bittersweet joy. This was Elijah's way of saying he loved her, of recognizing the importance of family bonds in the wake of loss. I think that's an excellent adjustment to your matrix. She said, squeezing his hand gently as the plane climbed above the clouds. Tamara gazed out the window at the vast expanse of sky stretching before them. The journey to San Francisco had begun with an act of courage from her extraordinary son, a young boy standing up for justice, with nothing but knowledge and conviction as his weapons. It had led to reconciliation, to healing, to precious final moments with her mother that she would treasure for the rest of her life. And now, as they journeyed home, Tamara knew that something fundamental had shifted in both of them. Elijah had glimpsed the power of his unique gifts to effect real change in the world, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. And she had been reminded of what truly mattered, not old hurts or stubborn pride, but the connections that sustained them, the love that transcended even death beside her. Elijah had opened one of his great-grandfather's legal books, his small finger tracing the annotations in the margins with reverent curiosity. The inheritance was more than just physical objects. It was a legacy of courage, of intellectual rigor, of standing firm for justice, even when it meant challenging authority as Chicago awaited them on the horizon. Tamara felt a sense of peace settling over her. The grief of loss would remain. But so would the renewed connections, the healing that had occurred, the lessons learned, and most precious of all, she had her son beside her. Her extraordinary, brilliant, compassionate son who saw the world through the clear lens of facts and figures, yet understood its deepest truths with remarkable wisdom. Whatever challenges awaited them, whatever new adventures lay ahead, they would face them together, armed with knowledge, with courage, and with the understanding that, in the end, it was love that mattered most of all. Thanks for watching this incredible story. If it touched your heart or inspired you, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. Sharing your thoughts, your support, helps us continue bringing these powerful real-life stories to light. Until next time.